Joining us this week is the former athletic director at St. Cloud State University, now the current commissioner of the NCHC, our favorite conference in college hockey. Commissioner Heather Weems, thank you for joining us on this Tuesday evening.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
So Mike's going to jump right in. We're going to kind of go off of the interview you did with College Hockey News for a couple of questions and then move on from there. But he's got the first question kind of off of that podcast. So I hope some people have spent time to listen to that one. I found it informative and I hope they did too.
Okay.
Yeah, I listened to it, actually listened to it today, and you answered a lot of their questions very eloquently, and it gave a lot of good information. Like, I'm not familiar with the names of the people who do the podcast, but like one of the guys who asked you the questions, I'm a little bit on the other side of not being a fan of the on-site tournament. I like the centrally located tournament, but it's a little bit of a two-party question. One is how are you going to accommodate the fans that would come? Because we talked with a fan from Omaha last weekend. Excuse me. Last week, that was their family trip. They enjoyed coming to St. Paul. That was kind of one of the main trips that they came with their dad. And then two, how are the allocations for tickets, and what is the conference doing for the opposing fans? Because I'm assuming that there's going to be at least a little section, like most other sports, there's a visiting section, not very much, but how is that going to work in, especially with these smaller arenas? Because you said like CC and Western, the two smallest arenas. How are you planning on working through that?
I'm going to be honest and say we still have a lot of details to work out. Obviously, with the contract ending, with the Excel, we needed to start that conversation early, and from a scheduling perspective, we had to understand where to go. So, to be honest, there are still questions that we need to answer in terms of allotments and how we're going to manage that. The number of tickets, whether it'll be a percentage to try and make it a little bit more fair across the various sizes of arenas that we have. So there's still a lot. I at this point, it would be premature for me to tell you exactly how that works because we just haven't had the conversation. There was a part of it that we simply said, okay, we've got to make a decision from a facilities perspective and from a scheduling perspective. That was probably as much of a driver is that coaches, already were saying, wait a second, we've got to be getting to our schedule or our schedules for the 2025-26 year. And part of it for sure was going to the 3-game or the 3-weekend playoff format, which also drove the conversation about neutral site versus campus sites, because it's a lot harder to the coaches certainly were motivated or to look at that 3-weekend playoff, and doing a single game at a neutral site is hard financially to get interest from a neutral site for that sort of engagement per se. So I don't have a good answer other than to say we've got a couple of years, or let's say a year to, my priority right now is now I'm turning my focus, one, to the frozen face-off for this year. Two, we've got some bylaws and policies that we need to adapt because of ASU's entry on July 1st. And then that will probably put me in the summer in terms of really trying to put together a working group to look at some of the logistics of how we're actually going to manage.
That makes a lot of sense. You get one thing done and then you have some ideas, but okay, we got the major part done.
Right.
Now let's hammer out the details.
And I will just say, like for me, to be honest, it's a very bittersweet conversation going to neutral sites, or I mean to campus sites, and partly, I mean, and it's a little bit different probably, Mike, for you and I, or I'll call it for people who are more in this region. I know for our UMD and St. Cloud State fans, it was an easy trip to make, and it was easy to plan that and circle it on your calendar, so to speak. I'm not so sure that all of our membership felt that way. And I go back to even when I started my career at the University of Denver. And I remember going to the WCHA Final Five, at the X, and it's just a great experience. And the staff do such a wonderful job that, it's a little bit bittersweet for me as well. That said, I also understand from the perspective of the coaches and from the student athletes, playing in front of home sites. We haven't actually. I mean, the benefit is, um, at the Excel Center, since the first year, 2018, we've always had at least two local teams. And by local, I mean St. Cloud State, UMD, and UND, that make it. I think it would be a very different experience if we had three or four of our outlying teams from a footprint perspective. That's always kind of been um, the question we've not been able to answer either.
And I promise you, I got hammered for being a local person on Twitter for my thing. I was like, yeah, I know it's easy for me, but
Yes.
So you mentioned scheduling that far out, but I would like to look at scheduling more in the near future here. We're adding the ninth team in Arizona State, and we look at the scheduling for the conference the last 10 years. That last weekend has always been a rivalry weekend, and it's been a very important weekend for figuring out who gets the Penrose, who gets home ice.
Yep.
I think last year, other than the Penrose being determined, I don't think that any of the seeding outside of Denver and Miami had been figured out until that last weekend. um, we know that one team will be sitting out conference play pretty much every week of conference play, but do we know what that last weekend is supposed to look like? Are we going to try and keep those maintained rivalries, or will it just be a full rotation across the board?
We're going to give preference when possible to the pod more than anything. So in each of the pods, the Western, the Central, and the Eastern pod, um, in that last week, if we can keep, most of the time, that we would end with each of the institutions playing one of their pod, partners, that would be ideal. It won't work out that way every year, and because of, the uneven number of teams, there will be a team that has a bye week that last weekend every year as well. So it will always leave, at least a team or two who are probably going to have to cross, pods, but we will try and give preference, to keeping some of those rivalries in that last weekend.
and that was one thing that I was thinking about is other than the independent schools, I didn't know if um, you were going to keep those, even those rivalries that we've been so used to over the years. I mean, St. Cloud and UMD, we played 13 times in the last 2 years. I mean,
It was
it's
insane.
great, but it's a little insane.
Yeah.
Um, and each of the last 2 years, the winner of that 4 or 5 series has gone on to win the Frozen face off. But um, that was what I was thinking. Do you schedule an independent that weekend? Do you give the buys earlier in the weekend? And I didn't know how much you could divulge as far as the schedule uh, versus just giving a team a buy, which in some sense is an advantage that they can get healthy, but it's also good for the coaches that they know this year they're going to get the buy, just kind of a rotating schedule.
Yep.
Um, that that's that's interesting, just based off of the well. Other than independence, you can't schedule anybody because everyone else is doing their conference play.
Right, right. And that's going to be the case throughout the conference season, is that pretty much every week there's going to be, just with uneven numbers, you're going to have at least one team who is in a bye. And so, and obviously Arizona State is coming in, so they're no longer an independent. So, obviously looking at the Alaskas and Lindenwood would certainly be a possibility. Each of the coaches is going to have to determine that, because a lot of them, to be honest, like that bye, particularly in the second half of the season. They like having at least one week where they can get healthy. So, it'll be just a rotation schedule for that more than anything.
And then, we're seeing a lot of influx in college sports, especially in the football ranks of conferences expanding. being eliminated. Like this was the last week end for I think it's the Pac-12, and the Big Ten going to like 16 teams or something. Do we see a similar trajectory for hockey and kind of like is there expected expansion possibly down the road for the NCHC and kind of how would that look?
Right.
Or
Um,
what would it take for a team to be um, proposed for that kind of like the route Arizona State took?
Yeah, I think you know, to be honest, if any of us could read the tea leaves of what's happening in the NCAA right now, I think we'd all be the guru that everybody wants to talk about or talk to. You know, right now our priority, certainly from a hockey perspective, is just ensuring or advocating for a voice at the table. As single sport conferences, we don't sit in the same circles sometimes as our multi-sport friends. And obviously hockey, you know, in both a good and sometimes a disadvantaged way has benefited from, you know, kind of being able to do our own things. But I think as all of the conference changes happen, we are really trying to be a little bit more progressive in thinking about what does the future for college hockey looks like. Because if you think December 5th, you know, Charlie Baker, the president of the NCAA, sent out across all of divisions 1, 2, and 3, you know, kind of his proposal, so to speak, and I'll use that lightly. And we had a conversation with him actually just a few days later, but he sent out a proposal, and as a politician he would say, with his political background, he would say, you know, lots of times you put a proposal out there, and really what it does is it gets the conversation started. But we know that in the NCAA, continuing to operate the way that we operated for a long time just isn't working any longer. The litigation that's taking place is onerous and actually not beneficial for anybody, I don't believe. And so trying to carve out for hockey, what will that look like? Because in that memo, what he talked about is potentially it, adding another, call it division, that would essentially be FBS, and giving them even more autonomy than what they have right now in terms of talking about rules and how they set themselves up, and you know, what they do with student athletes in terms of maybe trust funds and those sorts of things. And you know, one of the points that we made at that time was, what you have to remember is hockey already operates differently than most sports. We're multi-divisional, you know, and the example I gave is in the NCHC alone, once Arizona State adds, in a 9-member team, we will have an FBS team, we have FCS teams, we have non-basketball or non-football playing Division 1 teams, we have Division 2 and Division 3. So if all of a sudden you make rules that are different for essentially what's going to be, let's say, 9 or 10 teams in the country, Arizona State, the Big Ten, and probably Boston College, what does that do? And I think what I would say is a little bit of a traditionalist is, what we love in hockey is the parity that we've established. You know, and you know, 2 nights ago, Colorado College, a liberal arts school of 2,000, came into the Gophers' house and beat them. And you know, there are sports where that's an anomaly, it happens, but you know, you don't count on it. I think in the sport of hockey at the Division 1 level, that's that's not an anomaly. We've seen in the last 10 years Division 1, 2, and 3 programs win the national championship. And you know, so much of what we want to do is try and retain that competitive equity in a way that makes it exciting for our fans, and makes every single weekend matter.
Yeah, parity is definitely something we see because how many times do we see the number one team change throughout a year?
Oh my gosh, this year it's been every weekend, I would say, almost.
Yeah, yeah. There's been
certainly seems like, I mean,
very few that have held it from weekend to weekend.
Right.
um, so now a question that Wes and I have talked about, and he did receive this question as well, is NCHC TV. And we love it. We both use it. It's great to be able to have all 4 games at once, even though I typically have 3 on the side and then the UMD game on. Uh, but there's such a dynamic way of like, each broadcast has its own dynamic. UMD's cameras look like they're from 1992, so only a year younger than I am. Like, North Dakota is high end. St. Cloud, they're very high end, but they also have the student broadcast program. I have kind of a distant cousin that's going to Oklahoma State. We had Kirsten Kroll, who was at St. Cloud State, um, on a few months ago. Would Is there a thought of changing and standardizing the streaming service? And I know it a lot depends on the school too for offering those programs, because I don't even know if UMD does, but maybe working with the schools to introduce a program to allow these students to get into broadcasting. Because my relative, she was like, I only knew of a few options. And then, yeah, there might be non-official things and little bit of mess ups, but it's kind of standardized across the board, instead of, Jim Rich is doing St. Cloud broadcasts with Gino Parrish and I can't remember the North Dakota guys' names, and
Yep. Alexander.
UMD. Like, is that something that you would maybe look at or have thought about, or anything going forward?
Yeah, we have conversations about that every year, and we had it as when I was an AD, and we're having it as a commissioner this year. We did put forward just a few weeks ago. We did kind of an internal assessment of each of our institutions, and the pros and cons, and let's call it the opportunities for improvement. Because we know that we have paying customers or paying subscribers who are looking for a certain level. And so, a little bit, if you say, North Dakota is probably the top of that, simply because they use Midco, and Midco as a regional television provider provides a really high product. So the comments that we provided back were both about the actual camera and audio quality, but then to some degree it was also about, for lack of a better word, some of the talent. And there were some things, I mean, some of it is a financial piece of it. Now that said, we've also seen improvements. I would say, if you watch, I'll use Omaha as an example. Omaha was one of our programs that probably struggled a little bit more in the past. They purchased a new camera this past year, and we think that it's done a pretty significant job of improving. There are cases where it's radio talent that's simply being picked up on NCHC TV, and I think there's a couple of things. One, the radio talent, sometimes then it just means that you're muting. You don't have, during intermission or breaks, you don't necessarily have programming, so it looks a little bit differently. And then you're muting the feed, and then you forget to unmute it, and simply you don't have any audio feed. That's an easy fix. That's simply the responsibility of the people who are doing it. But the other piece is a little bit around, the polish, and I think that the television broadcasters, what they understand is, on a television broadcast, which essentially NCHC TV is, because that's how web streaming works these days, you can't maybe be as much of a homer when you're doing the production for NCHC TV. And I think part of that simply is that, when you're doing your local radio broadcast, for the most part, your listeners are your home teams and your home fans. When you're doing NCHC TV, we have a number of subscribers, and in a lot of cases, it's actually our subscribers actually subscribe to get the away games, because in a lot of cases, they're actually at the home games. So we are trying to give some tips, and some having some conversation about just some best practices that we can implement. And I think the other piece of it is we are talking about, from a financial perspective, what can the league do to set some standards and increase the quality across the board, not probably with the expectation that everybody gets to the level of Midco, but is there a happy medium that, with some level of investment by the institutions and potentially the conference, that would be a benefit to all of our subscribers?
I have two follow-ups. One, I love UMD, but yeah, they need to work on the homerish a little bit. I sometimes I can't even stand our TV guys. Bruce Iskey at radio. I know what I'm getting with him, and it's just radio. But the second part was, with the variation in quality, for me, I'm fine with paying my subscription, um, even if I know it's student run and it's giving these kids the opportunity that aren't playing, that do want to get into. Say there's a kid that he sees the NFL cameraman or NHL cameraman that he wants to do that. Somebody wants to go into broadcast audio, stats, play by play, color commentary, something like that. I think it would be great for it just to be, and yeah, you're going to lose the quality of Midco or something, but like that happy medium of teaching these kids, because they're the future of broadcasting, and maybe taking a step back from quality versus the difference in quality, but
Yeah.
not teaching these kids. That's my opinion on it.
Yeah, the one thing that I would say to that, and putting on my campus hat, having been an athletics director and on a campus that certainly saw some financial struggles, Husky Productions at St. Cloud State is really a preeminent program, a preeminent major at St. Cloud State. But the amount of, even when I first got there as athletics director, the initial investment back in, I'll say 2013, 2014, or not the initial, just an upgrade investment was in the $5-6 million range to get that level of quality. And then you also have to, there's an external executive producer who helps do the teaching and that sort of thing. So I'm cognizant that while particularly I think it probably works a little bit better in radio, at the television level, part of the quality is the talent, but part of it is having the right equipment, and in order to be marketable on the in the profession, that was part of the argument at St. Cloud State of why they needed to invest in order to catapult their students into all of these different positions and be lauded because of their background. They needed to be working on the sorts of equipment and understand the production and the engineering piece of it that would help them move directly into a position. And that is extremely costly, and probably just not something that institutions, particularly just knowing higher ed right now from a financial perspective, everyone's struggling a little bit. They're all choosing where are they going to put their investments? What are they going to be known for? And so, while as a student proponent, I love the idea. A little bit of it is financial and realistic. How realistic is it?
Yeah, exactly. And like UMD's engineering and different things, and like all these schools have their
Yeah,
different things.
they all have their different things.
All right.
Wes, I think you have one more.
One more topic for you before we get you out of here. We know it's late and we appreciate your time. Um, as a whole in Michigan, we have an issue with refs. I think the NCHC has had its fair share of controversies with refing. Is there a process upon which like calls are reviewed after the fact, or there's like a look at what's going on and how it's determined whether which refing crew is going to ref like playoff series, or what you look for in the off season, what you want to make as far as like points of um, emphasis, things of that nature? Like, is there a backside that fans don't see?
Yeah.
Because I think the biggest one recently was really the major to Poland against Denver, where there was really no intent to even touch the player. He essentially fell into him. I think there may have been an issue with the review equipment, but that was one that I know for sure. Even the coaches who do a try their best to not make things vocal,
Yeah.
even they kind of let their feelings known on that one.
First, I will say, refing is, the whole officiating challenge certainly exists, and it's only heightened with all of the review equipment and HDTV. Let's be honest, when you had the old analog systems and you could hardly see the puck, people couldn't be nearly as discriminatory in actually seeing and thinking, what they thought. So, from a process perspective, so we have a director of officiating who grew up in the officiating world, which I did not. So it's good that he has more knowledge than I do. Um, And our director of officiating is always looking, recruiting, in conversation with up and coming officials or those potentially coming back sometimes from really trying to get into the AHL and the NHL. They're working with USHL and those sorts of programs just to try and keep the pool of talent open. Obviously there are fewer and fewer people being serious about going into roughing, so that pool is only going to get harder. And obviously as people retire and step away, that becomes problematic as well. And I'm not trying to defend things, I'm trying to give some
Yeah.
sort of an inside understanding of what it looks like. I think the other piece that I always do like to remind folks is, for our referees, they have full-time jobs all week, and then they give up their, Thursday nights or Friday through Sunday, and then go home. And in many cases, their wives hand their kids over and say, "Okay, it's you now because you've been gone the last couple of days." Our coaches and our student athletes get to practice their craft every single day, pretty much. Our officials, and I think we have a great group. And I say to the coaches, if they didn't wear the stripes, they'd be guys. They're just they love the game. They want to give back to the game, and they'd be guys you'd go out for a beer with, to be honest. Um, and our goal is to continue to make them better. And so yes, we do have, through our DV Sport system, which is our official review system, each week, the director of officials, or maybe not every week, but we'll pull a call, and he'll put it out on a network so that they can all look at it. And it's called "You Make the Call." And then you ask them to go in to review it, not just the ones who did that game, but everybody go in, review it, and then they have to defend what their decision is, and then you go back and you kind of explain it. The reality is there's always subjectivity, and when you're on the ice trying to look through three people and figure out exactly what happened, sometimes that view is different than maybe it is from the top. But I would also tell you, in a lot of cases, when I look at the reviews based upon the actual rules, they they're good calls. It just is. There's always going to be the ones that are the most controversial. There is a level of subjectivity which you're never going to get away with unless we go to AI officiating, which maybe someday will happen. But we do have a process by which we review um, individual calls throughout the week. We do have in the fall, we have a session where we get together with the referees, and in some cases the linesmen as well, particularly in a rules change year, and we'll do essentially like a 2-day clinic, and just talk through some things. We have at pretty much every conference game and most non-conference games, we have what we call a supervisor of officials, and they sit next to the video review person, and they try and help. They're not supposed to, they don't tell an official what to call, but when they come into the box and they're looking at a review, um, they will make sure that they're applying the right rules. They might say, "Hey, we think you should see this angle," and those sorts of things. And one of the things, we do have a working group that's starting next week, actually getting together to look at DV Sport, and how it works and doesn't work at some of our institutions. Some of our DV Sport, we have an 8-camera system, and there are some institutions where just the placement of the camera doesn't give us the best angles. There are some institutions where we don't always get all of the angles, and for instance, sometimes the television angle, or the webcasting angle that our coaches are getting or that we're putting out on 10CHC TV doesn't come through necessarily, the in-house, so to speak. So we're trying to figure out if there's a better way that we can ensure that what the coaches see and what the officials are seeing are the same thing. So yes, there's conversation continually about officiating, and trying to give feedback to officials. There's evaluations. Coaches are provided the opportunity to evaluate calls every single week. Um, and then particularly we try, lots of them won't do it every single week, but sometimes, then we'll try and get it at the half to say, "Hey, what are you seeing? Is there anything that we can provide feedback on?" And then as we get into playoffs, yes, they are ranked, and there is selection done as we get into the playoff times.
Yeah, no, I think we certainly there's that 3 hour window when your team is on the ice. Every call that goes against your team is the worst call imaginable. Every call that goes for your team is the best call imaginable.
Yep.
Outside of that, I hope most people tend to leave everything in the arena and not take it to a different level, because again, they are, for the most part, guys who are just trying to give back to a sport that they appreciate as much as the fans do, and it's nonsense to take those things further than that. And I think a lot of it is just the fans don't know or understand quite as fully as a ref does, and we're not necessarily given those same opportunities to understand the calls, that I think creates a lot of
Yeah,
animosity
and
in certain states.
we did start up, and again, it's just, I think our third session is coming out here soon, but we did mic'd up with Mike, which is a new social media um bit. Mike Schmidt is our director of officiating. So once a month, November, December, January, and February, we've put out, just he picks a topic and he tries to explain it. I think the one coming up now is coaches' challenges and what can they challenge and what can they not, and how does the whole review process work. So there's tidbits that we try and get out there. And I like that level of transparency. I mean, it's not a perfect science. If anyone thinks that it's going to be, just take those colored glasses off. But I think that we do try and have good feedback with our officials. We are the only conference in the country who has supervisors at all of our games, that can try and provide some level of feedback in between games. After games, they also go and talk to the coaches, on Friday before the game starts. Saturday between games, they'll go talk to the coaches. Hey, anything you want us to be looking for, that sort of thing. So we've tried to be really proactive about it. Again, it's just not a perfect science.
Wes, you can speak for yourself that you think every call is the greatest for your team and every call is the worst for your team. No, I'm kidding. But my dad said it best. Like, no matter what call you make in any sport, and I've refed hockey years ago at lower levels, but no matter what call you make, you're gonna make half the people mad. It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. And it's a thankless job. And I get on refs. I used to coach basketball, and I almost got technical fouls because I wasn't good because I was coaching for my dad, so I had to rein it in because otherwise I was going to get yelled at home. But it's a thankless job, but you do it because you love the game, and that's the best part. And actually, one of the referees in the NCHC Beyondage, his mom was my health teacher in high school. So I'm like,
Yep.
I guess I can still get on him, but I don't want to get on him that much if I'm at a game.
Yeah. No, I mean, we take seriously. It's a big part of the game. It really is. And so we do take it seriously, and we think about it, and we're trying to put, the best people out there that we can. And we're trying to make sure we're giving them feedback, and that we're trying to make the product the best that it possibly can be. And in a lot of cases, if you actually looked at it, they get a heck of a lot more right than they get wrong. But nobody pays attention. Like in life, no one pays attention to what you get right.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. It's the wrong stuff. Everybody's like, ah.
Yes.
All right. Well, that'll wrap up our session with Commissioner Weems. We'll let her get out of here and back to more important things than talking to us knuckleheads. Once again, thank you so much for your time. It was a great conversation.
You're welcome. Happy to do it anytime.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate
Yep.
it so much.
All right. Take care. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too. All right,
Yep.
we'll
Bye.
take a short break here and we'll be right back.